Hey guys, so this week is week 2. Last week we went over the structure of the Bible, the geography of the Old Testament, and the historical books of the Old Testament. So if you haven't already watched that, it's going to be kind of important for this week because I'm going to assume that you already know the map and what I'm talking about. So this week we're going over the first 4 eras of the Old Testament, and that's creation, patriarchs, Exodus, and conquest. So yeah, make sure you're listening to keywords like who and where, and then I'm gonna give you a storyline summary after each era. All right, so with that being said, let's get into the creation era. So first, we have our creation era, which starts out in Eden. And our first point is that there's creation and everything is being created by God. And part of that creation is man is created by God and in the image of God. And that can be found from Genesis 1 to 2. And then we have the fall, and that's where the serpent deceives Adam and Eve, and they have to be kicked out of Eden that way. And so because of this, like, sin starts growing rapidly and it's becoming really bad to where God then has to bring out a flood with Noah and basically destroy everything and start over with Noah and his family. And so then that brings us to the Tower of Babel, and that's the beginning of all nations. So the Tower of Babel, God tells the people of the time to spread out, make disciples, be fruitful, multiply, just disperse. Instead, they decided to stay in one place and build a tower up to God, and God said no, destroys the tower, separates them for himself, changes their languages and everything, and that's in Genesis 11. So yeah, and then our storyline summary for that is that Adam is created by God, but sins and destroys God's original plan for man. So pause the video right now and take the self-test, and we'll pick it up right then. Okay, so now that brings us to the Patriarch era. And so the Patriarch era, we have Abraham. And so Abraham is called by God in a town called Ur to basically father a people. And so part of being called is he travels up to Haran and then goes down into Canaan. And so with that, Abraham is now the father of the Hebrew people. And so this is basically God becoming focused on one family instead of all of humanity. Abraham has 2 sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Isaac is the second father of the promise and has 2 sons of his own, Esau and Jacob. Jacob is the youngest son, but ends up getting the promise because he deceives his brother and father and steals the promise. Jacob is the father of the nation of Israel, and so what that means is that his name was changed from Jacob to Israel throughout his section of the Bible. And so Jacob ends up having 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob has a son named Joseph with the wife that he really wants, but before that he had 10 other sons. So Jacob is the 11th son, and then there's a 12th son below him, but there's not a lot about him. Joseph is actually the leader in Egypt because he is sold by his brothers into slavery, ends up being brought into Egypt, and ends up interpreting dreams for the pharaoh of the time. And so he ends up rising up throughout like the ranks and has pharaoh's favor. That pharaoh ends up dying though, and unfortunately, like, the new pharaoh that comes in doesn't like the Hebrew people. And so the Hebrew people came in because there was a famine throughout the land. And so the pharaoh that liked Joseph said, yeah, they can all come in. And at that time, there was only 70 people coming down. But by the time that pharaoh died, there was like a lot more. And so this new pharaoh that comes in, he feels threatened by that and ends up enslaving the Hebrew people for the next 400 years. So our key location for the Patriarch era is Canaan, because that's where Abraham is called to go. And so Abraham is our key figure. Our key location is Canaan, and our storyline summary is that Abraham is chosen by God to father a people to represent God to the world. So pause this video, take the self-test for the Patriarch era, and we'll pick it up again. All right, so now we're in the Exodus era, and so our key figure is going to be Moses. So 400 years of enslavement, and then Moses is born, and so God calls Moses to deliver the Hebrew people from slavery. And so they're in Egypt. That's our key location. And so we have deliverance, and that's the freedom from slavery in Egypt. And so Moses, along with the rest of the Hebrew people, come down. God parts the Red Sea, and they come down, leaving behind Egypt. Then comes the law. So they stop at the base of a mountain, Mount Sinai. And so Moses goes up and he gets the law, or the 10 Commandments, from God on Mount Sinai. They then wandered for 40 years, and God calls them to reclaim the promised land of Canaan. And so that brings us to Kadesh Barnea, which is a place of rebellion against God. So they were told to conquer the land, and so the group of Hebrew people sent out 12 spies and to check to see if they could do it. 10 of those spies came back and said, we can't do it, they're too big. 2 of those spies came back and said, we can do it, and that was Caleb and Joshua. But the Hebrew people end up listening to the other 10 instead of Caleb and Joshua, and so it's a place of rebellion against God, which leads to another 40 years of wandering because they didn't listen. And so that's the consequences you get from rebelling against God. So our key location for the Exodus era was Egypt. Our key figure was Moses, and our storyline summary is that through Moses, God delivers the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt and then gives them the law. All right, so pause this video right now and take the third self-test, and we'll pick it up in just a second. All right, now we're in the Conquest era. And so after the second 40 years of wandering, we come to a place called Mount Nebo, and that's where Moses dies, overlooking the promised land. And so the next person to rise up to power is Joshua. And so Joshua was being discipled by Moses at the time, and so he was God's next choice. So our first point is Jordan, and that's the Jordan River, and that's the miraculous parting of water, mainly the Jordan River. And so the Jordan River was pushed back 20 miles all the way back to a town called Adam, which is basically God saying, like, everyone back to Adam is like good now, or it's like good to go, I guess. Then we get our second point, and that's Jericho, and that's the miraculous conquest of a city. So it's the city most south, and so the Hebrew people march around the city for 7 days, and then on the seventh day they march around it 7 times, and the walls fell and they conquered the city. And then we get our next point of conquest, and that's the defeat of all of Canaan. So they are just going from city to city and basically taking back the promised land. And that brings us to our next point of dominion, and that is the finalization of dominion over the promised land. That's week 2. That's the creation through conquest eras. So next week we'll be going over the rest of the 9 eras of the Old Testament.